What's keeping you emotionally attached to that person who you know isn't good for you? There's something telling you it's not an equal give and take. You know something feels off here, and yet you seem to not be able to walk away from them. I know when I was in the spiritual community, they really promoted, messages through music. When you see that person, that means they're thinking of you. And yet, with all this information, this person was never around. I never received any sort of commitment, no acknowledgement, nothing. Bare minimum. I was receiving the bare minimum while I was giving the most of myself and then some. And my world was struggling. My kids were going without. My house was falling apart. My finances were struggling. And yet here I still had this longing for someone who couldn't make time for me. I fell for all the spiritual belief systems that is associated with the twin flame. I fell for hurt people are hurt people. I fell for maybe they were intimidated by you. All these things that were emotionally rooted in what I never was given as a child, which was that one-on-one connection, that communication, that closeness, that intimacy. And the way that I mean by that from a parent to a child is like that intimacy where you have that you can talk to them about anything. You have that safe space. They provided it for you because they show up emotionally for you, which means that you don't have to regulate the parent. They support you emotionally. Mentally, they provide you with the information to help build you and not suppress you because they feel that you might outgrow them at an earlier age. So all these things that I didn't receive as a child, I was looking for them in a partner. And that doesn't make sense because that's such an odd thing, but that's what I was looking for. That was the pain of my heart. That's where it was pulling. And I just remember making so many excuses for people who would dance around the fact that they were attracted to me but could never actually invest in me, and they couldn't even talk about being attracted to me. It's like it was required. They would do things from a distance to try to reel me in emotionally, right? Emotional abuse. And they wouldn't actually give me what I was looking for, which is an answer. If you're interested in me, have that conversation, let me know, because I'll tell you yes or no. But there was never a conversation, never an acknowledgement. And it always left me wondering, like, what is going on here? I remember being confused. And so moving forward, when I'm making relationships, I'm making sure that this person is consistent in their actions around everybody, not just some people. I'm also looking to see, like, what do I really like about them? Was there something, am I going through a rough time right now where I need support and it would be nice to have somebody by my side? Because there were times when I felt like that and I wasn't really thinking about who that somebody was. I just thought an extra person meant extra support with the bills, someone to talk to. It would be a distraction from the pain that I was feeling, but it wasn't just pain, it was discomfort because I had growing pains. And I had to recognize, like, I'm doing something different, I'm very uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean I need to bring in people that are versions of my past where they were never really for me. And actually they were quite competitive with me. And so when you start to recognize this, you're less emotional. So I had to start making decisions that are more logical. I had to put my daughter and my kids in my position. If my kids were dating somebody like this and they were treating them like that, what would I say to them? Would I want them to stay there? And I had to take it outside of myself to look at it and really process it differently than in a minute, because at that time I was very impulsive and I was very emotionally imbalanced because I hadn't received what I needed as a child. But even after I've tried to communicate this as an adult, I still wasn't getting it. It was so confusing because I'm like, before I didn't know I needed this, and now that I'm recognizing I need it and I'm stating what I need, I still wasn't getting it. And so I had to recognize where I was going to all the wrong people for all the wrong reasons. And I had to also look at my assumptions that I was making with people. So just because people have a friendly face and I had not received a friendly face in childhood, I had to recognize that that's not a reason to connect with someone. Someone being friendly once in a while is not good enough. Somebody who doesn't support me in front of everyone is not good enough. That's still very secretive and shady behavior. And so I also had to recognize compatibility. Can this person even provide me what I need right now in this moment that I do feel like I'm lacking something? And these people will tend to make you feel not good enough by ignoring you, by isolating you, by being hot and cold and inconsistent and creating confusion. And that is where emotions stem from. You don't have the information, you don't know why. And so the more I gave myself logic and clarity, and I answered the questions for them that they were not willing to offer me, it was way easier to disconnect from these people. It would, the sooner I could add clarity and just even common sense. Like if they're not that into me, then they're not that into me. They're not willing to spend time with me on a regular basis. That's like if this is required, if sexual intimacy is required at the very beginning of a relationship before I even know you, that's not for me. Because when I start to heal myself and withhold my energy and give it back to myself, I realize that these people never had what I was looking for, and that I had placed some sort of costume upon them, and they were in costume too because they weren't recognizing it either. So the more information I allowed myself to have in that situation, instead of going into the emotional place of that, it really allowed me to give myself the answers that they weren't willing to hand me. And that's where I learned how to read between the lines and become more discerning, is that there's a lot of people that don't want to change and grow because they don't think they have to, because they involve themselves in situations and dynamics and relationships and groups that don't require them to grow. They play the victim, and those people believe that victim side of them, and they're totally comfortable with that, because there are people who are like to be the hero to people who are struggling. And I also recognize a lot of these people were holding back their energy because they could see the vulnerability in me at that time, in the transition that I was at. I was struggling, and they could see that. And it's almost like by them withholding their affection, their attention, and their emotional connection in the way that, like, I can understand that, you know, you're important, and just things like that, just things that you need to hear. They're withholding this because they're hoping that I would fall and that they could come in and rescue me. And they couldn't even help themselves in that moment. So you gotta be careful of who you're giving to and for what reasons. And I used to really see myself in other people, because I'm like, hey, I struggle with that. I've been there. And the reality is, you will have similarities with certain people, but the intentions are very different. And there are people who are willing to help themselves, and there are people who are willing to play the victim. And that's just how they're built. That's how they've learned. That's how they decide to continue to be, and they're quite comfortable there. And so recognize, when you can recognize that in somebody else, and stop impulsively giving to people, and pull back your energy and ask, why do I feel the need to jump in to give to this person? Why do I feel like I have to give to them? Do I feel bad for them? That's weird to feel bad for a grown adult, right? That's weird. But if you understand that, what you're gonna look back is in your childhood, that's how your parents played you and played on your emotions, right? That's how they played people. And so you would see that and be like, oh, I feel bad for my dad because he's really upset and miserable right now. Maybe his job sucks, and you know, he's talking about, you know, what he's dealing with at work with his coworkers, but he's not doing anything different about it. He's still signing up for the same old trauma instead of making change. And we can make as many excuses as we like, but if we're still showing up, then we're still a participant. And so if we're still showing up in these dynamics, then we have to be acknowledging where that situation, well, we know it's not good for us, we're still gonna come out of that probably with some grief and pain that we're gonna have to release and recognize and release, or let go of and recognize. So just be aware of, like, why you're being drawn to a person. Just because a song sings does not mean they're playing your song, and that is not necessarily for you. And so I had to recognize that. I had to look at my belief systems that have, you know, kept me stuck in these situations, making me almost like invest in the emotional pain that I was feeling. You know, songs will really pull on that heartstring. And while I've learned to release a lot of emotions, I just wonder, what if I just stopped listening to that love song? What if I recognize what that said and then go inside and give that to myself instead of looking for it in another person? And the sooner I started looking inside instead of outside of myself for something that I am more than capable of providing for me, the more I walked away from these emotional dysfunctions and more into my logical mindset. And it's more in the logic where you get clarity, and you can't stop. You won't stop. And that's important. You'll just keep going and growing. And that's where you want to be. So hopefully this helps. Take care.